Seit Anfang des Jahres ist sie die neue britische Botschafterin in Österreich. Lindsay Skoll war zu Gast bei den Oberösterreichischen Nachrichten. Im Gespräch mit Redakteur Eike-Clemens Kullmann spricht sie unter anderem über den Krieg in der Ukraine und die Zeit nach Boris Johnson.
Sehr geehrte Frau Botschafterin, herzlichen Dank, dass Sie heute bei uns sind. Die Welt blickt seit Monaten gebannt auf den Krieg in der Ukraine. Wie beurteilen Sie selber die Lage?
I think the first thing to say is it is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for Europe to have war back in Europe. It's almost inconceivable. It's a tragedy for Ukraine, but it's also a tragedy for Russia. This is a war that did not need to happen. It's a war that is Putin's own choice, completely unnecessary. It is an aggressive move against a sovereign nation, and it is extremely worrying. It is extremely worrying as to how this might end. And our main concern is a dreadful, unnecessary loss of life on every side. And war in Europe should not be taking place, and it absolutely has to stop.
Können Sie einschätzen, wie lange dieser Konflikt dauern kann? Also der reine Krieg unter Anführungszeichen, aber letztendlich dann auch die Folgen für die Ukraine, für Russland, aber auch für die Welt.
Yeah. It's a real concern. I fear we could be looking at a long war of attrition. I think Putin has made his maximalist ambitions very clear. And when one takes such a maximalist approach, it is very hard to see where that finishes. In many ways, what we are seeing is the realization of what Putin has been saying for a long time, his desire to regain a sense of Russian empire, to bring back the Russian lands under his control as he sees them. So in terms of where he will stop, it is very hard to say. Equally, it is for Ukraine as a sovereign independent country to decide where it stops also.
Aber es ist am besten so schnell wie möglich, den Krieg zu beenden.
In terms of humanitarian, economic, every other cost, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it is for the people of Ukraine to decide what it is that they will accept.
Der Westen, also auch Großbritannien, die EU, die USA, liefern verstärkt Waffen in die Ukraine, um den Ukrainern gegen Russland zu helfen. Ist das genug oder sollte es auch Verhandlungen mit Wladimir Putin geben, um eine friedliche Lösung doch endlich zu erreichen?
I think that there's two parts to that question. Number one, is it enough? I think it's very important to say that the supply of weapons is just part of a whole package of support that the UK and other countries are fully committed to. So we see that as it's more than £3 billion already of weapons supplies, but also really essential humanitarian support, economic support, and of course diplomatic support as well. In terms of whether that involves discussions and negotiations with Putin, I guess again I would say it is for Ukraine to decide whether that is the path they wish to take.
Wie schätzen Sie die Situation ein? Ist Putin überhaupt ein Gesprächspartner? Kann man mit ihm noch etwas verhandeln oder ist er einfach unzugänglich?
As a diplomat, I always believe in the power of negotiation and discussion and how important it is to talk. This situation is a little different though. And I think what Putin showed the world before his invasion was a complete unwillingness to talk. And subsequently with other leaders who have tried, again we have seen no serious intention to negotiate.
Sie haben lange in Russland gearbeitet, also Sie kennen das Land, Sie kennen die Menschen. Könnte es einmal passieren, dass es doch eine Revolte gegen Wladimir Putin und gegen seinen Kurs des Krieges geben kann?
It's very difficult, and this is why I say it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for all the people of Russia. This war is not being fought in their name. They are a good, warm, open-hearted, wonderful people. It is a great country with so much potential. But I fear it has chosen, or Putin has chosen, a course which only means tragedy for the country. It means an economy that continues to decline. It means for the people of Russia an ever more restricted society without many freedoms. It becomes ever more oppressed. And I really worry about what, therefore, the future holds for the people of Russia with this trajectory. I think what we have seen over the last 3 or 4 years since I left Russia is a continued repression, a closing down of safe space for debate, whether that be intellectual, academic, a closing down of any independent media voices, a closing down of civil society and non-governmental organisations. That all makes me really worried about what the future of Russia is, particularly for those people who cannot accept what Russia now feels like to them in 2022.
Derzeit gibt es die große Diskussion und die Angst auch letztendlich in Westeuropa, dass die Gaslieferungen aus Russland ausbleiben können. Jetzt haben wir Nord Stream 1, die Pipeline, die sozusagen wegen Wartung für 10 Tage stillgelegt ist. Und die Lebenshaltungskosten im Westen steigen massiv. Das betrifft ja nicht nur Russland, sondern eben, wie gesagt, auch den Westen, Großbritannien genauso wie Westeuropa. Könnte es sein, dass die Rufe der Menschen lauter werden, die Sanktionen zu beenden und auch den Druck auf die Ukraine zu erhöhen, Verhandlungen für einen Frieden doch zuzustimmen?
Sanctions are always a difficult question. At the end of the day, as diplomats, as sovereign countries, sanctions are the one tool we can use, we can agree on, and do have effectiveness. And we still have to wait to see the latest rounds of sanctions take their effect, and hopefully cause Putin to reassess the cost. I think what this war has taught us is how changed the geopolitical situation is now. The world will not go back to how it was. Europe will not return to how it was before the invasion. And that means we must reassess everything, including our energy supplies, our dependencies, our trading relationships, our diplomatic relationships. And I think the whole world has been taught a lesson as to how risky it is to be wholly dependent on a single energy source. So the good news is that Europe was already discussing diversification of supply. The good news is that we're all committed to resolving issues around climate change and progressing towards a low-carbon green growth transition. And therefore, a lot of good work had already started in trying to move away from cheap Russian oil and gas, getting off the Russian hydrocarbon hook. So, for example, in the UK, we had very small dependency on any Russian. It was diesel for us, which we have been fully able to source elsewhere, plus our own North Sea reserves. I think for other countries in Europe, that is more difficult. And it is not just a question of supply, but also infrastructure, particularly if you look at a country like Austria. And therefore, there are some difficult choices. And what I'm very concerned about is that in diversifying or finding alternatives, we must not lose sight of our climate change ambitions. So, for example, some countries are talking in the short term about reopening coal mines and using coal.
Germany is...
Exactly, and Austria too. And what we must do is be very, very clear that a short-term solution to this current energy crisis remains a short-term solution, and that together we still work towards very real, important world climate targets that are really essential. It's a very complex picture.
Die Menschen im Westen machen sich natürlich große Sorgen eben wegen der Sanktionen und der Auswirkungen auf die Lebenshaltungskosten. Wie groß würden Sie das Risiko einschätzen, dass es in Westeuropa, auch in Großbritannien, zu Protesten, auch zu Unruhen kommen könnte?
I think the important thing is to make sure that everybody understands the root causes, the reasons for the current conflation of issues. So it's not just war in Ukraine. It's a combination of 2-3 years of pandemic. It's a combination of that plus inflationary pressures, plus supply issues, a whole range of things. Of course, these are very, very difficult questions, and each government must decide how they are going to protect their population from the worst excesses of this rising cost in living. But I think it is something to realise that we are all in it together, and that some of these problems do have common solutions. It's going to be a tough economic outlook for everybody, I think.
Sie waren auch beruflich in Nordkorea, auch ein anderes Land, das in der letzten Zeit ein bisschen aus dem Blickfeld verschwunden ist für uns aufgrund des Konfliktes in Russland/Ukraine. Wie lange kann sich Kim Jong-un an der Macht halten? Kommt dann seine Schwester nach? Und gibt es damit auch kein Ende der Bedrohung durch Atomraketen?
Okay, so two questions there. I think, for as long as I've been studying North Korea, which is a very long time, everybody asks how long can Kim, whether it be Il-sung, Jong-il, and now Jong-un, stay in power? So it's the perpetual question.
3 Generationen.
So you've already seen a dynasty succession of 3 generations. So therefore, it's not an easy question to answer, and it's as much about the system as the personality. And for me, it's about, well, what enables that system and personality to remain in power? And I think you have to look beyond the person to which countries actually are enabling North Korea to exist in the state it does. And essentially, for me, this is a Chinese issue. It's part of a Chinese strategy. And I think it is fair to say that China would rather have a North Korea that exists as it does currently than a failed state entirely, with all the risk of humanitarian disaster, refugee flows, and a power vacuum very close to 2 allies of the West, which is Japan and South Korea. So it's a very complex geopolitical one and not a straightforward one. But essentially, yes, in North Korea you have a totalitarian state in every sense of the word, with all the human tragedy that unfortunately entails. In terms of its rocket programs and weapons, it is very hard to see why North Korea would let go of that. It has always seen the threat of nuclear war as its ultimate bargaining chip.
Sie haben es gerade angesprochen, China hat natürlich eine wichtige Rolle, auch in Richtung Nordkorea, aber nicht nur in Richtung Nordkorea, es geht ja auch um den Konflikt in der Ukraine, um den Krieg. Auch da hat China eigentlich viele Interessen und eine wichtige Rolle zu spielen. Wie würden Sie China einschätzen, hinter den Kulissen doch in Richtung Frieden zu arbeiten oder abzuwarten, wie sich der Konflikt entwickelt?
That's a very good question. I think China will, with regard to the war in Ukraine, I think it will continue to wait and watch very carefully. China knows that the whole world is waiting to assess what it says and how it reacts. obviously with regard to motions through the United Nations and elsewhere against Russia with regard to its aggression. China has used its veto, it has remained silent, and sometimes actually supported Russian action. However, it knows it does so at a cost to its own, both international reputation
It really is.
and its desire to be seen as a responsible state actor. So it's a very interesting time for China watchers at the moment.
Kommen wir in Ihre Heimat. Wir sehen es auf dem Bild. Premierminister Boris Johnson ist demnächst Geschichte. Er hat jetzt den Parteivorsitz zurückgelegt und wird als Premierminister ausscheiden, wenn ein neuer Parteichef gewählt ist. Das soll bis 5. September der Fall sein. Gibt es aus Ihrer Sicht eine Präferenz, wer denn die Nachfolge antreten könnte? Es gibt ja viele Kandidaten, was man momentan schon weiß. Präferieren Sie einen Mann, eine Frau?
Well, that's an easy question because as a
For a
diplomat,
diplomat, yes.
I am not allowed to have any opinion on party politics. And so my preference is not worth anything. I think what it's interesting to say is how colourful British politics remains. It always has been. It always will be. You've said there are a number of candidates, an interesting range of candidates. I mean, the thing I think I would wish to stress is that we will not see another general election for up to 2 years. So what I can guarantee is a continuity of the same policies under Johnson, under another Conservative leader. So, our support for Ukraine, for example, our foreign policy will not change at all.
Okay.
And I think what's the important thing about British democracy to say is that our institutions are super strong. So almost regardless of who is at the top, everything continues to function. I don't think you will see too much change, regardless of who is the next party leader.
Also Sie glauben, es wird dann auch wieder etwas Ruhe einkehren, innerparteilich, dass man sich nicht damit beschäftigen muss, wie lange bleibt noch jemand Premier, sondern man konzentriert sich auf die Probleme im Land und wartet dann auf die Wahlen 2024.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whoever succeeds Mr. Johnson has that balancing act that every world leader has, to really concentrate on tackling the most important domestic politics, but also, especially for the UK, in providing a really global outlook, a statesman role for the world. The UK remains a global power in every sense.
Boris Johnson hat die Ukraine sehr stark unterstützt, also auch sehr persönlich, war in der Ukraine beim Präsidenten Zelensky. Ist hier eine Änderung zu erwarten? Sie haben schon gesagt, es wird wahrscheinlich gleich bleiben, egal wer jetzt Premierminister wird. Wird die Unterstützung Großbritanniens für die Ukraine weiterhin in diesem Ausmaß aufrecht bleiben?
Absolutely. So our support for Ukraine will not change at all.
Keine Änderung?
Absolutely no change at all. So our determination to support Ukraine to succeed is unchanged. Our support, whether that be military, economic, humanitarian, will be unchanged. That is an absolute commitment from the UK to the people of Ukraine and not just between two leaders.
Schon klar. Sie stammen selber aus Schottland.
Ja.
Auch nicht uninteressant, gerade im Hinblick darauf, dass es ja für nächstes Jahr schon wieder geplant ist, ein neues Unabhängigkeitsreferendum stattfinden zu lassen. Wie stehen Sie dazu?
Again, I'm not supposed to have an opinion. It's an interesting time. I mean, it's quite a complicated legislative process in order to determine whether the referendum can go ahead or not. So this will be several months of legislation both in Scotland and in Westminster to determine whether it can, because 2014 was not so long ago. And there was a clear decision by the Scottish people to remain as part of the Union. So first of all, we have to see whether a referendum is possible. I'm sure that if it is, there will be a similar question asked of the Scottish people. The Scottish people will ultimately decide.
Wenn man sich mit dem Vereinigten Königreich befasst, kommt man an einem und an einer Person nicht vorbei. Die moralische Autorität ist Queen Elizabeth II. Ja. Sie hat jetzt ihr 70-jähriges Thronjubiläum gefeiert, groß gefeiert, aber bei vielen Menschen ist auch ein bisschen Abschied und Wehmut schon dabei, dass man befürchtet, sie könnte nicht mehr lange regieren, weil sie leider auch gesundheitliche Probleme hat. Wie würden Sie sehen, Nachfolgeregelung, wenn sie denn dann eintritt, doch derzeitige Kronprinz Charles oder sollte das Zepter gleich auf den Enkel William übergehen?
Well, that's an easy question to answer because constitutionally that is unmöglich. So, according to our constitution, the crown must pass from the Queen to Prince Charles.
Okay.
You cannot leap
kann ja nicht verzichten. No. Kann ja nicht sagen, ich werde nicht König und gebe das Zepter weiter.
Theoretically, yes, but I really don't. I don't see that happening. And I think what is very important to say is that there have been very, very numerous and lengthy discussions. Her Majesty the Queen will have made her desires known absolutely clearly as to what should happen after her reign. Of course, it's so difficult for people in the UK and the Commonwealth to even think of a time without Her Majesty. I mean, 70 years is an extraordinary achievement and length of service and duty. But I'm very, very clear that Prince Charles will make an excellent king. He has resolutely and frequently shown his absolute dedication and duty to not just the UK, but again the people of the Commonwealth, to people of all faiths. He has shown really progressive, forward-thinking ideas on everything from climate change to architecture to integration of people of faith. Incredibly warm, compassionate and human man. We will be very lucky to have him when the time comes.
Prinz Charles war ja schon in Österreich. Sie sind jetzt seit nicht allzu langer Zeit in Österreich. Was haben Sie hier schon kennen, möglicherweise auch besonders schätzen gelernt? Sie sind seit gestern in Oberösterreich unterwegs. Wie gefällt Ihnen das Land?
Oh gosh. Well, I know he has a great love for Austria, both him and the Duchess of Cornwall. I know would be delighted to return. Those links are obviously very, very strong, and this year we were obviously remembering the Queen's state visit to Austria all those years ago. So with regard to me, I have felt it really important to get outside of Vienna as quickly as possible to make sure that I visit all of the Länder so that I can see for myself the true Austria. I feel the same when people come to London. London is it's an amazing city. It's our capital city, but it's just a small bit of a bigger jigsaw, a bigger picture piece. So yes, I'm determined to visit everywhere to get my own impressions, and then hopefully if we have another royal visit, we can think of some other bits of Austria to show them.
Frau Botschafterin, herzlichen Dank für das Interview. Alles Gute für Ihre Zeit als Botschafterin in Österreich. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.